In the southern town of Briarwood, the police department was an institution that mirrored the town's uneasy history. Its officers were a mix of hardened traditionalists and a handful of reformists who wanted to bring accountability and trust back to the force. One of the latter was Officer Marcus James, a black man in his late 30s with a clean service record and a reputation for standing firm against unethical behavior. Marcus had always believed in the ideals of justice and service, joining the force to help his community, but his unwavering principles often placed him at odds with many of his white colleagues. Despite his rank-and-file position, Marcus had become a thorn in the side of the department's leadership. His insistence on transparency and fairness clashed with the culture of silence and favoritism that dominated the precinct. Whispers about him circulated among his peers, many of whom viewed his actions as a betrayal of the so-called brotherhood. Among those who harbored the most resentment toward Marcus was Captain Brian Rogers, an imposing figure who commanded both fear and loyalty within the department. Rogers and his close allies, Officers Lucas and Grayson, had a long history of bending the rules to suit their own agendas. They saw Marcus as a threat, not just to their power, but to the fragile status quo they were determined to preserve. The tensions between Marcus and his colleagues had been simmering for years, but the events of one summer night would bring those conflicts to a violent and humiliating climax. It began with a routine call on a muggy Thursday evening. Marcus was dispatched to a convenience store after reports of an altercation. When he arrived, he found the store clerk trembling behind the counter and a young white man, tall, muscular, and visibly intoxicated, shouting threats. The clerk had bruises on his face and pointed at the man, pleading with Marcus to intervene. Without hesitation, Marcus arrested the suspect and began filing the necessary paperwork. But before he could finish, Captain Rogers and Officer Lucas arrived on the scene. Their demeanor was casual, almost dismissive as they approached the suspect. Rogers barely glanced at the bruised clerk before turning to Marcus. "Let him go," Rogers said flatly. Marcus blinked in disbelief. "Captain, the clerk says he assaulted him. He's intoxicated, and—" "I said let him go," Rogers repeated, his tone hardening. Lucas smirked behind him, clearly enjoying the tension. Marcus hesitated, then slowly released the cuffs. The suspect, smirking and muttering insults under his breath, sauntered away as the clerk looked on helplessly. Marcus felt a wave of anger and shame. That night, he filed a formal complaint against Rogers and Lucas, detailing their failure to follow protocol. For Marcus, it was a matter of principle, but for Rogers, it was a declaration of war. The complaint sent shockwaves through the department. Filing a grievance against a superior was practically unheard of in Briarwood's precinct, where loyalty was valued above all else. Rogers, furious and humiliated, saw the complaint as a personal attack. He wasn't just angry, he was determined to make Marcus pay. Over drinks that evening, Rogers, Lucas, and Grayson devised a plan. It wasn't enough to reprimand Marcus or isolate him further. They wanted to humiliate him in a way that would send a message to anyone who dared challenge their authority. "We'll teach him what happens when you step out of line," Rogers said, his voice low and dangerous. The others nodded, their smirks reflecting the cruelty of their intentions. The following night, as Marcus prepared to leave the station after his shift, Rogers and his men ambushed him in the locker room. Lucas locked the door while Grayson grabbed Marcus by the arm. Though Marcus was physically strong, the element of surprise and the fact that he was outnumbered left him vulnerable. "Don't fight it, James," Rogers growled. "You brought this on yourself." The three men forced Marcus out into the parking lot, ignoring his demands to let him go. In the dim light of the lot, they pushed him onto the hood of a patrol car and began tying him down. Thick ropes bound his wrists and ankles, securing him tightly to the vehicle. Marcus struggled, but the ropes held firm. "You think you're a hero?" Lucas sneered, leaning close. "Let's see how you look now." Rogers climbed into the driver's seat, revving the engine as Lucas and Grayson climbed in beside him. The car pulled out of the lot, its tires crunching on the gravel, and began a slow crawl through the streets of Briarwood. The sight was grotesque. Marcus, his uniform disheveled and his face a mask of defiance, lay helpless on the hood of the car as his colleagues jeered and laughed. They paraded him through the heart of the town, their mocking voices audible through the open windows. Smile for the cameras, Marcus, Rogers shouted, his laughter cutting through the night air. What the officers didn't anticipate was the number of witnesses who would see their cruelty. Briarwood's downtown streets, though quiet at night, were dotted with surveillance cameras and late-night pedestrians. As the patrol car rolled through the city, several bystanders stopped in their tracks, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Among them was Rosa Miller, a retired schoolteacher and longtime advocate for justice. Rosa, known for her unshakable resolve, immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. She pulled out her phone and began recording, her hands trembling with anger. "This can't be real," a young man beside her muttered, pulling out his own phone. Within minutes, videos and photos of the spectacle began circulating on social media. Captions like, "This is happening in our town," and "They tied a cop to a car," accompanied the posts, igniting a firestorm of outrage. Calls flooded the police station as residents demanded answers. Activists began organizing, and journalists scrambled to verify the unfolding story. Meanwhile, Rogers and his men continued their joyride, oblivious to the chaos they had unleashed. By the time the car reached a quiet residential street, the situation had escalated. A crowd had gathered, their voices rising in anger as they confronted the officers. Some held signs hastily scrawled with phrases like, "Accountability now," and "Justice for James." Rogers slowed the car, his bravado faltering as he realized the depth of his mistake. The flashing lights of state police vehicles appeared in the distance, signaling the arrival of reinforcements. Rogers and his men barely had time to react before they were surrounded. Marcus, still tied to the hood, watched as state officers ordered Rogers, Lucas, and Grayson out of the car. The three men protested loudly, their excuses drowned out by the crowd's demands for justice. Marcus was finally untied, his wrists raw and bruised, but his spirit unbroken. The incident quickly became national news, dominating headlines and sparking a broader conversation about abuse of power within law enforcement. Rogers and his accomplices were arrested and charged with assault, unlawful restraint, and misconduct. Their actions were condemned by officials at every level, and the Briarwood Police Department faced an independent investigation that uncovered widespread corruption. Marcus, though deeply shaken, refused to let the experience define him. He became a symbol of resilience, speaking at rallies and working with community leaders to push for reform. His lawsuit against the department resulted in a landmark settlement, which included mandatory training programs and the establishment of a civilian oversight board. 1 year later, Marcus stood before a crowd of supporters on the steps of City Hall. His voice, steady and filled with conviction, carried over the sea of faces. "This isn't just about me. It's about ensuring that no one, officer or civilian, has to endure what I did. Together, we can create a system that values justice over silence." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers a testament to the power of unity and perseverance. Marcus's story, though born of pain, became a beacon of hope, proving that even in the face of cruelty, courage could ignite lasting change.